So now I'm really thrilled to introduce you to our final panelists for this final session of the Climate Impact Summit. So I'm introducing you here to Melia, Rayner and Robyn Denholm, two of my fabulous colleagues at Blackbird. So Melia is a big believer in the power of stories and the words we choose to tell them. She spent over a decade working in communications for innovative brands and people. She's currently the Communications and Community Manager at Blackbird and is therefore responsible for crafting our comms and our content strategy. And she helps our 100+ portfolio companies get their big ideas out into the world. She's also the co-founder of the Community Collective, a community supporting tech and startup community leaders to strive at every stage of their career. Before Blackbird, she led content strategy for tech communications firm Character and Distinction and edited Australian design publication Est Living. So she's going to be introducing you to and interviewing Robyn Denholm, who joined Blackbird as operating partner in January of last year. In this role, she's working with founders of a handful of our later stage technology companies to scale up their operations and to lead our founder success team to put in place programs that help our founders and operators of all of our companies and the broader Australian ecosystem to level up. She is also the chair of the board of the directors at Tesla. She joined the board in 2014 as an independent director and chair of the audit committee, and she was appointed to serve as the independent chair of the board of directors in November of 2018. Her global experience encompasses leadership roles across lots of technology companies, including CFO, head of strategy and COO of Telstra, CFO and COO of Juniper Networks, and senior VP of corporate strategic planning at Sun Microsystems, amongst others. And if that wasn't enough, Robyn is also the chair of the Tech Council for Australia. I'm going to now hand over to Melia to chat to Robyn about this sort of next frontier. Thanks, Mel. Thanks, Robyn.
Thanks, Kate, and delighted to be here and delighted to be speaking to you, Robyn. We all learn so much from you at Blackbird, and I know that everybody on the call today is going to also have that opportunity. So just want to say thank you to Kate, to Danny, and to Zach, first of all, for putting on this brilliant event. Now, we had a little bit of spicy chat regarding electric vehicles at the end of the last panel. So I thought maybe a place to start is, as the chair of Tesla, one of the world's most valuable companies making electric vehicles, a lot of people have pointed out that vehicle electrification isn't actually new. So, I'd love to hear what you think, maybe to open, about what makes Tesla such a success story.
Well, thanks, Mel, and thanks everyone for joining this morning. I'm really pleased to be part of the fun of this Impact Summit. Actually, it's been great to see the agenda come together and the amazing people speaking over the last few days. So thank you. So yes, and I was on for the last part of the last panel, so that was very interesting. So from my perspective, and actually, the mission of Tesla is actually to accelerate the world's movement towards sustainable energy. That was the mission right from the very beginning. And when the team got together early in the 2000s, they actually looked at where CO2 emissions were coming from and where things could really make an impact on moving the world towards sustainable energy. And there were two major sources that they talked through. One was the electrification of transportation, and the other was actually the generation of electricity, and how to actually pull that whole supply chain together over time to again accelerate the world's movement towards sustainable energy. So to me, in terms of electrification of transportation or EVs, it isn't new. If you go back late in the 1890s, even earlier than that, electric cars and transport were actually invented. There's always dispute as to who produced the first production type vehicle on the electric side. And there are many who claim it, but they were all around the same sort of time frame. And to me, the reason why I think electric transportation is taking off now as opposed to back then is, firstly, the technology's absolutely moved forward in leaps and bounds. Lithium battery actually did make a big difference in terms of not just the weight and the range, but also the economics. And so to me, in any market disruption, you've got to have the right technology, you've got to have focus and very clear guide in terms of where you're going, and the mission for Tesla really has provided that. But then the other thing that happens in any technology evolution is actually the economic curve crosses. And on the lithium battery side, but also on the cost of electric vehicles, that's really sort of happened in the last 5 years in terms of getting the right range for people with the right economics, with the right vehicles that people really wanted to drive. So to me, it's a combination of all of those factors.
Yeah, awesome. And actually you raised that kind of point around like the right technology, the right focus, and the right economics. You know, I think this comes as a byproduct of the focus, but obviously the right product is a big thing. And we've talked a lot over the last 3 days and heard a lot about, you know, it's not just if we want to create a more sustainable future, we're going to have to create things that, you know, are the best, not just being sustainable, but are the best, full stop. And so, you know, I'd love to hear a little bit about like how the company has really thought about the brand in that light, or, you know, how Tesla is kind of creating these products that are highly desirable to own as well.
Yeah, I think the secret to any, I think, challenger or anybody coming into a market is to really think about the product dynamics first and foremost. Because if you look at Tesla, when, again, Tesla decided to go into the electric vehicle space, they weren't trying to produce the best electric vehicle. What they were actually trying to do was to produce the best vehicle. And that really shaped everything that they were doing from the beginning, in terms of it had to be the right design, it had to be something that people really wanted, it had to change the perception of transportation. And so, you know, I often joke, you know, nobody was doing a focus group and saying, I want a 21-inch screen in the front of my car to tell, you know, to run the car or the vehicle. But that is what, you know, the first Tesla production vehicle actually had with the Model S. And so to me, it's really trying to change the category, using the technology in the best possible way to change how the perception of a product should be. And for any of you who've been in a Tesla, it is a very different driving experience in terms of how the driver is front and center, but with all of the technology available to it, and particularly with over-the-air updates, when you can get new features and functionality as the vehicle, you know, is already in your hands. So that concept didn't exist from a vehicle perspective before Tesla started doing that. So to me, I often talk about coming into an industry with a blank sheet of paper, not being constrained by the norms of that industry, and to really work through that. And I heard that in the last panel as well. So to me, it is that's a very key tenet, and startups in particular have that benefit because they don't have the legacy of you know, tens or hundreds of years of previous products that they've brought to market.
Yeah, that's a really good jumping off point actually to talk about some of the other work that you do, because alongside, as Kate mentioned in the bio, and I'm so glad I went first so that we could hear your impressive bio following. But you know, you wear many hats. You're still chair of Tesla, and you also are operating partner at Blackbird. And in that role, you're supporting a number of our late stage companies as they kind of reach that level of growth and scale. But I think, you know, something that we're really passionate about at Blackbird is, you know, investing in category defining companies, and, you know, companies that have ambition to really change the world. I'd like to dig in a little bit more on some of the things that we've heard over the last couple of days and how you see these come up in your role and the role that you play with our portfolio companies, if that's all right. So for instance, you know, one thing we know is a huge part of a company's carbon footprint, particularly if they're in manufacturing, is the level of the supply chain. And I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about what opportunities and successes you've seen with companies transitioning their supply chains, be it in the portfolio or if you need, you know, broader than that.
Yeah, well, I think you can't start early enough. So, you know, my advice to any the portfolio companies that are producing products as opposed to software. And I think software, there's also a supply chain element as well, but particularly those companies that are actually in production, manufacturing, or actually creating products, is to really think about the supply chain from day one. And think about it not just from an economic point of view. A lot of people are focused on, you know, who's the best supplier, how much am I going to be paying for this? Have I got certainty in the supply chain? That's definitely important. But actually even thinking about the carbon footprint of the supply chain, how many kilometers your components are traveling before they actually make it into the consumer's hands, in terms of the manufacturing process, or even how they're built, all the way back to the minerals and the actual raw materials that are used in the production of your products as well. And I think again, there's a very important role that software plays in that. You can't do that even as a small company. You can't track the kilometers. You can't track the best sources for supply without actually having the right systems in place. So again, my advice is you can't start early enough. You've got to really start integrated into the business plan of the startup itself, and actually at each stage keep evaluating that, because obviously the last few weeks is a classic example. Geopolitical events often disrupt supply chains, as do natural disasters. And having come out of the computer and storage and software industry, there were many times where that supply chain had been disrupted over the years. And so having the software in place, or the systems in place, to actually be able to really interrogate the supply chain really makes a lot of sense. And as I said, from my perspective, you can't start soon enough. For those more established companies, I think again, really understanding the supply chain is important, not just of the componentry as you're pulling it together, but also upstream in terms of what happens to your suppliers in terms of what they're doing, where they're producing, how they're producing. And from an ESG perspective, that's fundamentally important. And it's not just on the E. These days, obviously, there's a lot of focus on the S in terms of the social practices, not just around your direct involvement, but also of your suppliers in terms of everything like that. And then, all the way through to transportation routes and, use of different types of transportation in your supplying to your end user customers.
Yeah, makes total sense. And you kind of touched on it a little bit there, but I'd just like to unpack it a bit more if you don't mind. You're kind of working with startups at the very early stages. You obviously also have the perspective of working with publicly listed companies. Can you talk a little bit about, or expand a little bit more on like this idea of like the challenges that you face at the very early stages around ESG and just and impact in general, and then the kind of challenges that you might face later on, and any advice that you have for companies or operators in those companies that are tackling those?
Yeah, I think, again, I've loved this conference because to me it pulls together a whole bunch of different voices. For me, ESG is about good companies doing good things. And it's not just about the products, but it's also their social contract with their customers, their employees, and their other stakeholders. And so that whole thing about doing good as well as being a good company is really, I think, at the core of being a good ESG company. Obviously, the larger the company, the more focus there is on what the company's doing, and starting off with the right intentions, but also with the ability to be able to report out on various factors. And so Tesla, for example, a couple of years ago put out its first impact report. I think we're up to our 4th version now. The time, effort, and energy put into that is really important, because obviously Tesla is very well known for its E, but also you can't you can't rest on one area. You've got to continually improve all areas. And so each of the reports have come out. We've improved on the report, but even we've created focus on various areas. And I think from an Australian perspective, there's a lot of good examples of companies doing good things on that front from a large company perspective, a listed company perspective. But I also increasingly think that there's some great examples from smaller companies. And when you're a startup, from my perspective, you get to shape everything. So that focus and attention on the impact that you can have as a company, I think is one of the true benefits of founding and starting a company, because you can build it into the DNA from day one. And actually, again, it will evolve over time. You will continue to improve over time. And if you have a particular focus on one area, you know, you need to add focus on the others over time as well. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, Mel, but that's from a philosophical point of view. I think you know, good companies doing good things is sort of my North Star.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. If we kind of like track further along and in that like later stage or larger company, you know, I think for some of the people on the call today who are practitioners, you know, operators trying to get more buy-in and more interest, or maybe a paradigm shift in the way that larger organizations think about sustainability or about impact in general. You kind of, you know, touched on this idea of doing good and being a company and having a positive impact. But I think we also often hear about impact and sustainability and more of like the risk and financial management conversation when we talk about larger and later stage companies. And so if, you know, for the people on the call today thinking about like worrying or maybe that their function suffers as being seen as a cost to the business or a nice to have, you know, this is a topic we heard yesterday in some of the panels. Do you think that that's changing, or do you have any insights that you would kind of offer to folks in that position?
Yeah, I think impact it's got to be woven into the fabric of the company, as opposed to being a standalone function or a separate function. It's the same as risk. To be honest, I've managed, you know, had risk teams reporting up to me. If it's a risk team on the side trying to manage or work through the risks of the company, then quite honestly, it won't be front of mind for many of the leaders within the company, or even people on the front lines or all through the company. So again, whether it's a large company or a small company just starting out, or anything in between, it's got to be embedded in what the company's doing. And it's got to be part of the day-to-day, as opposed to a separate exercise or a standalone initiative, or, you know, or just about what the reporting mechanisms are. It needs to be part of an integrated part of the way the organization runs. So my advice, if you're a larger company, a publicly listed company, is to really sort of sit down and look at the metrics, the OKRs, whatever it is that you're measuring the company by, and whatever the compensation is sort of guided by, or the bonus pool, or whatever it is, and actually integrate in impact into that, as well as risk and those types of things. So, you know, the other thing for me is on the risk spectrum, you've got, I always think about risk in 4 separate categories: the strategic risk, you know, the financial risk, the compliance risk, and the regulatory risk, but also the operational risk. And for me, I think the biggest risk, and we've seen it over the last couple of weeks with sanctions in Russia and what the impact that has on supply chains, if we're not, if companies are not looking at the risk from how do my customers think about my products and where they're coming from, and how sustainable are they, or how you know, socially responsible they are, or how well the company is governed, then they're actually missing a very big strategic risk. And for me, the strategic risks are the types of things that wipe companies out, as opposed to any one of the other 3. The others are important, but the things that can wipe a company out over time or even directly is not thinking about, you know, what will my customers appreciate how my products are produced, or how sustainable they are, or those types of things. So that strategic risk is really, really important.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I wanted to just like expand on that a little bit more in terms of leadership, because if we think about strategic risk, I mean, the people at the top of the company who are leading the company are going to have an outsized impact on that, pun intended, on that strategic, you know, risk. And you've worked with a lot, I mean, you are working with a lot of leaders at the moment. You have worked with a lot of different leaders in your career. You know, what in your view are the things that set those best leaders apart when we think about how we can have a strategic and integrated approach to impact and sustainability?
Yeah, I think you've got to embody it. You've got to own it as a leader, and you've got to make sure that you're calling out the elements that are really important and the things that you can actually make a difference to. Not all companies can make a difference to every part of the sustainable products, but many companies can. And I think taking stock of what true impact you can have, and what core competencies you have as a company, and the people within the company in terms of making a difference and being, you know, the best possible company that you can be on all facets, but really being taking that introspective approach in terms of what is it that we're doing that we can really have an impact on, I think is step one. And then, you know, beyond that, it's how do I actually mobilize, particularly if it's a large company, the entire company to actually fulfill that ambition or that ability to have that impact on the world, on society, on your stakeholders as well.
We are rapidly running out of time, but I'm keen to get a couple more questions in. Technically, we don't have time, unfortunately, for an AMA with this question and answer, but if you do have any kind of burning questions, put them into our QA function and we can try and get one or two in. I do want to talk about the elephant in the room, which is that in Australia, we're gearing up for another election, and we have a government, you know, in a government at the moment that have strong views on sustainability, on climate. And we heard yesterday, you know, that companies just need to act regardless of the policy settings, and be willing to take risks on sustainability being increasingly part of that business landscape, even if we're still a way off having all of the support in place at a policy level. But I'd be interested to know, you know, what's your view on that? Do you agree? Do you want to expand on that? Yeah, where are you kind of sitting?
Maybe I'm a little bit influenced by the number of years I was in the US, but I believe in a small g, not a big G, in terms of government. And in terms of pivot points in history where there's been huge technology change, the government isn't at the forefront of that. It is normally companies and individuals and inventors and scientists and all of that sort of stuff that are in the forefront. And I think that's actually what is happening here on the climate-related technology changes that have to happen in order for us to actually move more towards a sustainable energy environment. And I'm blown away actually by corporate Australia's approach, but also many of the founders across the ecosystem in Australia that are actually making a fundamental difference in it. The last time I looked at it, I think it was over 90% of the ASX, 100 have actually, or 200 have actually made climate commitments. They're actually changing the way their businesses are being run. And to me, that is what will move the needle faster than anything else. And also consumers. I think we underestimate the power of consumers and voters, for that matter, in terms of making changes, both from a technology perspective, but also from a societal perspective. And I think that Australian consumers have already voted with their feet. We have the highest penetration of rooftop solar in any residentially in any country in the world. So to me, we are moving towards the new technologies that will help us, avoid, further climate change by not having all the policies in place. So could you imagine how much faster it could be if our policy settings were right? And from my perspective, having certainty around policy for investment decisions is probably the most important element of government policy when there is a huge change in the way technologies are being used. And whether that's on the climate side or the sustainable energy side, or quite frankly, whether that's on R&D investment or any one of the other facets that produce a really robust and vibrant technology community, I think having those policy settings right is important. But it's not the way movements normally happen. Movements normally happen from the ground up, I think, from people and from companies, and eventually governments get there.
Yeah, I love that. And I agree, I think we all have a role to play. That's not to take away from the importance that policy settings place, but I think something that's come out of these last few days is like the incredible groundswell of support from a commercial perspective and from a grassroots and business perspective. Look, we're almost out of time. I just want to ask one more question before we let you go today. Robyn, you've been involved in tech development and the innovation sector for more than 20 years. So what makes you think that things are going to be different, in the next 20 years? And what gives you reason, like you say that you're an optimist, like what gives you reason for optimism?
Yeah, these panels make me feel really old because I have been around for a long time. So
that wasn't our intent.
But the reality is, I think we're still in the early innings of technology advancement for not just for impact, but also for society and how we actually live our lives on a day-to-day basis. So from an Australian perspective, I feel very optimistic about the environment that we're in. I think, in the 80s and 90s, the geographic constraints about being a large island in the Pacific, I think meant that a lot of our talent needed to go offshore to further their careers. But today, that's not the case. We have, the right capital settings, I think, in terms of, and we heard it in the last panel, great investors in early stage companies, but also I think a growing acceptance that even large companies need to invest in R&D and they need to do it locally. So for me, I am very optimistic about the Australian ecosystem. I'm also optimistic that technology can cure a lot of the issues that we're currently dealing with from a societal perspective as well. And climate change is one of those, but there are many others in terms of, food production. Again, I listened to the last panel. There's brilliant things happening from that. They're all things that emanate from science and technology. And the more that we can focus on that sector in Australia in particular, because I think we're slightly underrepresented today in terms of those sectors. But I do think, whether it's domestically or on the global scale, scene, I'm very optimistic in terms of our prospects in technology over the next 20 years.
Wow. Well, what a great place to close on. And as someone said in the chat, bring on the roaring 2020s.